Greetings everyone, this is Planet Mitch from lightrumors.co with another photo walk. But before I get into that, I want to remind you that LightRumors is a free membership website. Come over to lightrumors.co/join. You will become a member of our community and you will start getting our emails, so you won't have to think about finding out what the latest thing is. We'll send it to your inbox. Not long after I got my L16 in the mail, in the post, I did a photo walk to the local park along the way, shooting some photos, and some people were a little disappointed in some of those photos because they thought, hey, Mitch is a master photographer. Ha ha! Surprise! I wanted to take those photos as if somebody who maybe was an iPhone shooter or smartphone shooter and was just out for a walk and saw some cool things. They aren't necessarily the best photos I've ever shot, but I thought they would be typical. I wasn't worried about 100% focus. I was still trying to learn the camera, and in fact I still am trying to learn what works and what doesn't work and how it reacts. But I did another photo walk this morning along the same path, actually, and took some more photos. It happened to be a foggy morning, and just as the sun was coming up, the fog started dying off. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through each and every one of these photos, but I thought that it would be better to have a little bit of an analysis as we go, as opposed to just throwing those photos up there and letting you run through them. Of course, you have your own opportunity to see what you see. And a couple of these are redundant somewhat, but this is what I was experimenting with. And before I got to the park, this is one of the first images I took of this flower. And you will note that in the upper left corner, I have the information turned on. So you'll see that this is a 10,400 pixel wide by 7,800 pixel tall image, and that means this is like 80 megapixels. I don't currently get information about what the f-stop was. I'm sorry, not the f-stop, but the focal length. So hold on just a second. So if you haven't seen it yet, this is Lumen. And this is the same image that we were looking at. I'm sorry. Timeout. Okay, that was weird. I don't know what was going on there, but the image number was wrong on what I was just showing you. So this is the right one, 593. If I switch back over to Lightroom, you'll see that it's 593, so it's the same image. And it even looks a little different, doesn't it? It looks a little sharper over in Lumen. But I wanted to show you that this is a focal length of 28 millimeters, so there could be some blurry edges. We know that the L16 at 28 millimeters through 35 millimeters could have some rough edges due to the overlap, the way it is working, and I had it set to auto exposure, zero compensation, ISO is 165. So that's what it looks like in Lumen, and you can see the film strip along the bottom. And I shot a whole bunch of pictures that I'm not going to show you over in Lightroom. But that's how it kind of looks over in Lumen. While I'm there, what the heck, let's do the depth effect. So one of the things I've learned is that when you're doing something like a macro, something up close like this, that the image kind of already looks, I mean, it has a lot of depth, or a shallow focus to it, I should say. And that's just the way the lenses kind of work. And so if I click on the show depth effect, it's likely not going to do a whole lot for me, and it may even actually kind of make the image not look right. And I've reported this to the folks at Light, and they're going to be looking at some of these images. But you'll notice that it has processed this image, and look, it's blurry. So I don't think that's the way it's supposed to work. So I'll be sending this to them for investigation, and of course they'll be watching this. But if I go about halfway You still see that there is a little bit extra blur here in the background, but we've lost still some of the foreground. It's not as sharp. So on most of the quote-unquote macros, I have not been doing any kind of depth of field manipulation, and you'll see that I've not done that for any of the images that we're going to look at quickly. I keep saying quickly. And then I spend 15 minutes talking about one image. So here's the same image over in Lightroom, and it looks a little different, doesn't it? So what I did was I exported it from Lumen to a DNG and imported that over in Lightroom. So it just doesn't quite look the same, and I hadn't really thought about that. It looks, over here in Lumen, it looks brighter, it looks a little bit sharper, at least in the flower area. And when I get it over here to Lightroom, it's just not quite as punchy. But we also remember that this is like an 80 megapixel image. And so you can like punch in, if I go to 1:1, you see we get really close. Now this is an 80 megapixel image again. And so when you punch in an 80 megapixel image, I suspect that it's not going to be tack sharp. I have not ever shot any kind of a camera that has really high megapixels. Like the 5D Mark IV that I have shoots 30.4 megapixels. So this is almost 3 times that size. So I don't really expect it to be tack sharp at this resolution. But if I zoom back out, it looks pretty darn sharp. And of course, if I were to, and I'm not going to do this for each one of the images as we go through, but if I go into the develop mode and let's say I add some sharpening as it processes that, it looks a bit sharper. I have not tried to print any of these, but again, you can look at these on the web and see what they look like. Of course, you can do things like, I mean, the histogram looks pretty good. You can do auto exposure if you want, which I don't ever think, I don't like Lightroom, the way Lightroom does it, because I swear it overexposes everything when you say auto expose. But you can bump up the brightness and the vibrance and the saturation, and you can do all those kind of things. I have not sent this over to Flickr yet, where I'll post all the images. But again, you can do whatever you want to with these. These are DNGs of large size, so you can manipulate the heck out of them if you want to. I'm going to do reset because I don't want to send over the wrong thing. I want to send it over as raw. And that's one other thing that I want to note. A couple of people that I've been talking to that have the L16, they might actually do some processing. So one of the images I know that Mike Heck posted, he thought the sky wasn't punchy, so he punched it a little bit, and it kind of raised an eyebrow or two across the web because the sky looked bluer and there was a section that wasn't quite maybe up to par. So that wasn't necessarily the L16's fault, and I'm not blaming Mike, but what I want to do is, at least for the time being, you can sort of assume that all of my images are straight out of the camera without being edited unless I say they're edited. So let me run through some of these because I could talk forever. You know that I could talk forever. The flowers are not at their best peak time, but there was a lot of dew. We had a rainstorm yesterday, so I wanted to see if I could capture the water on this, I think it's a rose. It looks a little blurry when you punch in. This isn't quite as big as the other one. This is 75 by 5600, which is, I think, a 50-ish megapixel image. There's plenty of good detail in here. I have not run through all of these and looked for any stitching errors. But again, you can look at these on Flickr at full size, and we'll post them to the lightRumors gallery as well. But they'll be smaller because I let Flickr handle the big ones. Again, this one is about the same size. Let's see, this is 597. I don't need to, they're all at probably 28 millimeters at this range. You know, there's a little fly on this particular flower. I thought the color representation was fairly accurate. This is the second image. I think this one was a little bit sharper. I've punched in, but it still feels sharper when you're zoomed out than the other one was. But sadly, I chopped off the left side of the flower, but I was kind of just looking at the water and stuff in here. I happened to run into some large spider webs that had dew on them, so this is kind of the tunnel up here to the spider web. And, you know, it feels kind of flat. Of course, I could do the auto exposure, and Lightroom's going to blast it out a bit. You can play with any of the filters in Lightroom, etc., etc. Let me just turn these sidebars off so I'm not tempted. So again, I'll send this over straight. It's interesting because there's grass poking up through here, but the focal point was intended to be up here in the upper right-hand corner. And I don't know if there's a focal problem here or a depth problem down here. I have not looked at it, but you can see quite a bit of the detail in the spider web. Just thought that was interesting. Now, I told you it was foggy, and so as I turned to look back towards the sun, I set the exposure much lower on this particular image because I wanted to see what would happen in here. There's a little bit of color banding that goes through up here, but I don't know whether that's an L16 thing. I did not have a DSLR with me when I went for the walk. I was just going to walk, but I ended up doing some photography, and I bumped the exposure actually in the opposite direction, so I overexposed this because I was wanting to get this lamp post. You can see here on the lower left there is some kind of a flare. We've seen flaring in the L16, so it's interesting that we get that kind of a flare reaction, even though there's 16 lenses there, right? And it's shooting with 10. So here's another one I zoomed in a little bit. Same situation. I lowered the exposure a little bit. Same flaring. I have not gone through and really analyzed these images. There could be a little bit of a color banding up in here in the bright sun. If you look at the histogram, obviously that's blown out. I could try to pull it down some, but then we're going to start getting into some wonkiness like up here. Let's just keep going for fun. What do we get when we really do that? So a couple of minor issues up there. Again, nobody's going to do this with a particular image like this, so I would not blame light for any kind of a fault here. You can maybe sort of see that same problem, and maybe I could fix that in Lumen. I don't know. I'm not going to try make this into a massively long video like I typically do. Now, I went back to the pond, and I'm going to show 6 or 8 or so of these images because the sun started to come up just as I got there. So it was really foggy, and the fountain was not lit very well. So I wanted to see how the L16 would react. I want to get rid of this little part of this branch right here. It's kind of bright and annoying, or dark and annoying. But there's a couple of ducks out there. So moving through, I zoomed in a little bit. The fountain had a little torque to the way it was fountaining. I have not been able to, I keep looking at this down here. I don't know whether this is kind of merged together because of the L16 or whether that's the way it looks. I was not really paying attention to the back of that. But again, you see I can punch in pretty far here and see the ducks on the pond, and I see lots of details in this tree, and there's that annoying bit hanging over that tree. I apologize, I have not run through all of these in any kind of a detail. And it was, you know, it wasn't dark, but the sun was coming up, and you'll see in a minute that the sun came up right on this particular area. So as I was standing there, Here's a 28 millimeter view of the same area. You can see that the sky is clearing, and you can see the sun's just starting to come out. So I'm standing right next to a fence. I didn't go all the way into the park, so I was standing right next to this fence. And as I was standing there, I'm still not there. All right, so a little bit more light is coming on the fountain. This was zoomed in maybe to, I don't think I was at 150. Maybe I'll post that in the images later. This was a portrait orientation with the duck in there. Again, it was foggy, so I wasn't expecting these to come out to be tack sharp. I was wanting to see the foggy view, see what it looked like. Here we go, finally get to the spider web. So I was standing next to this fence, and I noticed that through the fence there was this spider web that had a lot of dew on it. Now this is a smaller resolution. I think I zoomed in a little bit on this, and it's not, if I zoomed all the way in, it's not 100% tack sharp. But the interesting thing about it was that the L16 actually was able to focus on this. I took my iPhone out, and I mean, I was standing less than a foot away from this fence, and maybe 2 feet. Okay, I was pretty close to the fence, and I was just surprised that the L16 was able to focus on the spider web. Now I actually was like tapping to focus over here on the metal part because I wasn't quite sure it would focus here, but when I tapped here it also focused in the spider web. And when I took out my iPhone and tried it, my iPhone could not catch the spider web at all. So I was pretty impressed that the L16 did this. And I know I've had trouble with my DSLR trying to shoot on the something like a spider web as well. Sometimes it catches it, and sometimes it focuses on the background. Now what I started doing, or what I was doing in many of those photos, was actually shooting through the fence. And you can see up here in the upper right hand corner, there's kind of a fence bar. Now I have shot through a fence with the DSLR before, and sometimes you get the image of the chain link, and I didn't seem to get that. So I really like this particular photo because the sun started hitting right on the top of the fountain. You can see along the wall in the back as well. This is a dam which built this lake, but I really like this image. It's airy and it's artsy fartsy, maybe, if you want to call it that. It's not tack sharp, which is, I wasn't wanting tack sharp, but it's sharp enough that we get this real illusion of fairiness. I don't know what the words I'm looking for. I was kind of aggravated when I realized that the upper right corner was fenced. But here's another image of the spider web trying to get the fountain behind it. Obviously, I was not trying to focus on the fountain. I was trying to focus on the spider web. This is also not as sharp maybe as I would like it, but yeah, let's try it. Let's see what happens if I go into Lightroom and add some sharpening. So it does get sharper. Some people might complain about how much sharpening. You know, you've got all kinds of tools to fool with. That's way too sharp. But you also notice that there's, you know, really not a lot of issues. I mean, we're zooming here at 1:1, and I'm not seeing a lot of noise. I'm not seeing a whole lot of issues. The sharpness might be a problem. It's over sharp. We're getting some halos on there. I guess there could be a problem maybe right here with the spider web. Maybe it wasn't resolved properly. Maybe over here is a slight issue, but if you're zoomed out, nobody's going to care. They go, well, that's cool. I probably wouldn't use this photo. I like the other one better because I know what the fountain is in the background, but I don't think anybody looking at this would normally know what that was a shot of. It would probably not work very well. A few more minutes later, the sun was really hitting the water fountain, and I really liked this photo a lot. There's not a lot of noise in here. A couple of people on DP Review were complaining that they said, well, the L16 isn't going to produce low noise shots. Well, this is definitely low noise. This is fog, of course, in the background. But I'm not seeing a whole lot of graininess. And again, I probably should look up the settings. It was on auto, so I suspect that it was close to ISO 100. Hey, yes, I love this fountain, okay? Well, it's close by. It's something attractive, and especially with the sun hitting it. So I finally walked away and was walking down the street and was walking towards the sun, so I wanted to see whether I could capture some of the light rays. You can see them on the lower right and here in the center. I felt it was a little bit more obvious to the naked eye, but I think that's been typically true anytime I've tried to do light rays in DSLR, and I end up editing the heck out of them in Photoshop or whatever. There is kind of a bright separation or bright lines here. If maybe I come in and fool with the exposure, you can see that there is this blown out section here in the center, which of course I expected because I was pointing right at the sun, right? So that's, to me, not a big issue. Some people it might bother. 99.9% of the people that are going to look at this image are going to go, well, if I boosted the light rays a bit, they would say, well, that would look pretty cool. And what happens if I do auto exposure? We get a little more, but there might be another band that goes right through here. Again, this is really hard to tell, and I don't think most people would care. I think this is exposed more than I wanted, but again, I start fooling with the exposure, and you can always find some faults in almost every sensor that's out there. So again, I'm not faulting the light on any of this. We obviously see some chromatic aberration around here. We've got some fringing, purple fringing. I'm going to reset before I forget and move on. Another similar image. This shows a little bit better. I think you guys can look for this yourself. So again, it had rained the night before, so I wanted to see what kind of impact I would get if I focused on water drops in the close proximity. I was about, I don't know, 1.5 feet, maybe 2 feet away from this as well. I confess that I probably should have changed the shutter speed to make it probably a lot faster, because I had a hard time holding steady. And this was the sharpest one that I got, but it's not as sharp as I would like, and I suspect that had to do with me, the 60-year-old guy who can't hold his hands steady as well as he used to. The other thing that I wanted to see specifically was the circular shapes of the bokeh, if you want to get into an argument about whether it's bokeh or bokeh, or whatever. But I found it interesting that each of these does not seem to be a perfect circle, but there appear to be a couple of little notches in just about every one of these, and I don't know what that's being caused by. But I thought I would point it out, because somebody will see it. This was a second attempt at doing that. I think this might be a little bit sharper here, but you are seeing the lens effect of the water drops, which is pretty cool. And the bokeh circles in the background, or the bokeh. I got really torn by somebody. I've forgotten who it was. So the sun was shining directly on these leaves, and I was standing underneath the tree, and these leaves were probably another 1.5 feet, 2 feet away from me. I don't know what kind of sharpness to expect out of this. They're not maybe quite as sharp as I was hoping. But I did find it interesting again that these two leaves were fairly close together, but the second leaf is pretty much out of focus, whereas the first leaf is right in focus where I wanted it. I zoomed out a little bit to get the full leaf in there, because I know some people get mad about chopping off the bottoms. Excuse me. Again, it's maybe not as sharp as I wanted. Maybe this is a little bit farther away than the section up here. I think I was pointing and focusing in the center. Sharpness would tune that a little bit. Here's another one that the droplets of water were actually on the other side of the leaf. I was on the underside, and the water was on the other side. So this is water showing through. And again, you notice that over here on the far right, lower right, it's in focus. And same leaf, just a little bit, I don't know, centimeters away, over to the left is out of focus. Now, if you start zooming in, you want to see some of the technical... oh, this one's actually... I did do something with it. Let me reset this one. So yeah, it was a little flat, so I went in and was tweaking that just to see what would happen before I started recording the video, and I forgot to reset it. So doing that obviously brought out a little bit of more grain in this particular area before I reset it. But I think it's a pretty cool image nonetheless. And of course, I would tweak it in Lightroom. Similar image. This one is not manipulated at all as I look over here. I really liked the shapes here. I wish it was a little bit sharper. Again, because I'm learning, I don't know if I had stepped back another foot or two. Maybe I was just too close to the leaves to make this really sharp. Learning has to go on, and I know some people said when I talked about learning before, they said, "Oh, I can shoot 10 photos and know everything I need to know about a camera." Well, I don't believe that's true, especially something that is this new. The technology is this different. So again, you can see these when I post them online. I'm not sure this one's as sharp at all now that I look at it. Oh, it's because I was zoomed in. So again, most people would look at this and go, "That's pretty cool." I hope. Just another one. It's still just a little less sharp than I was hoping. And maybe I'm a perfectionist. Maybe it looks great right here. I mean, this whole section, I really like the way that looks. And the fact that these two leaves are so close together, but one of them is blurry and the other one's not. The depth of field is really narrow. So another attempt at seeing the light shining through the trees, and I was figuring I would end up cropping this because I don't like the cars down here. But that's what that was. This one, just for explanation, I was not expecting this to be perfect. I probably would have lowered the exposure. In fact, I think I did lower the exposure probably to a -1 on this one because it was just flat out bright. I was looking towards the sun and there was dew in the grass, but I wanted to see specifically what the out of focus grass and brightness looked like. You can see in the histogram that that's definitely blown out. Those whites are just gone. But that's okay. That's what I expected to see in the sun. There's not a whole lot of noise or grain in there. Quite a bit of good sharpness here. Maybe I've missed focus. It's a little blurry in through some of this area. But that's what I was going for. I think I focused down here, actually. Yeah, this is much more in focus. Again, you've got lots of blown whites there, but that's what I was after. I was okay with the blown whites. Then I ran into the flower section. So several of these I think are pretty much underexposed. I lowered setting, the exposure setting on, it was still on auto, but I set it down to -1, I think. Because I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't blowing this out. So you can see there is a shallow depth of field here, even though it is quote-unquote f15 inside the L16. This one is 28 millimeter. I don't remember what this one was. But this was, I remember zooming out to see how much was in focus, the depth of field. And I think I actually set this at 35, to be honest with you, because you notice that this is 1043 by 728 or 782. I can't talk. 7800 by 10,000. So this is like an 80 megapixel image. So again, this is 1:1, and I would never really expect to be able to zoom in and crop this much. But you can see that the water drops are kind of cool. So somewhere in between this and that, but it's sharp here. You can see plenty of sharpness. This flower looks good. I don't see any exposure problems. The colors look good. I have not tried to find any depth map problems in here. This was a little bit closer. So again, I was standing in the same section looking to see what I could see in terms of macro and what the exposure would do with the water drops. And then I said, oh, let's point at the sky and get a blue sky with a red flower, pink flower, whatever color you want to call this. My wife would say that's fuchsia or something. I don't know. She's an artist. So that's what these are. These were intended to be some close-ups and some far-ways. This one's 8,000 by 6,000. The water drops look pretty sharp. There's depth of field, so it's fairly narrow depth of field. And I think this is the last one. Yeah, this is the last one. Parts of this aren't as sharp as I would like. It is what it is right now. So that's a quick run through of the images that I shot on my walk this morning. Today is the 19th of September. If you have any comments, of course, please let me know. Questions, I'll be happy to answer your questions. I'm still intending to do a Q&A from my my trip to Light last week. And of course, this has gone on longer than I probably expected. Some of you will like that, and some of you will say that I'm too long-winded. But this is what I look at when I go looking through the images. I thought it might help you to have a little diagnosis or a little walkthrough rather than just looking at the images yourself. Maybe you just want to look at the images yourself. And I'll quit babbling now. Thanks for watching. Sign up over at lightrumors.co. Chat with us in the Facebook group if you want. You can stop anytime you want, because I'm just going to keep babbling about light rumors. Thanks for watching. See you later. Bye.